Hello, and thank you for your interest in exploring how you can help make our community more sustainable. In this vignette, we focus on solar power generation systems and how they are implemented in a residential environment. It is our hope that this short video will help you understand the impacts of adding a solar system to your home, where we partner with our stellar neighbor and push ourselves to become a little greener. We will cover several topics that should give you a start into understanding this potentially overwhelming topic. We will start with a short description of the science behind solar generation and move on to looking into the technology that comprises these systems. We will then present the major components of a solar generation system and a few of the considerations you might think about when looking at the installation. Finally, we will provide a case study to add some context to the costs involved when undertaking a solar generation project and also provide some web resources where you can continue your investigation of this topic. Solar panel generation is based on the physical principle called the photovoltaic effect. The fundamental understanding of this effect was originally described by work done by Albert Einstein in the early 20th century. While he did not specifically invent the first solar panels, he did provide the underpinnings that allow current research to prosper. This work was so revolutionary that he was awarded the 1921 Nobel Prize in Physics for his theoretical description in 1922. The photovoltaic effect is an idea that describes how when light is shown on a metal, there is a decrease in the resistance of the metal as long as the energy of the light is sufficient and overcomes a minimal value. In the applied case of solar panels, we use a slightly different material called semiconductors, but the idea is the same. When the panels are exposed to certain colors from the sun or other light sources, the electrons are allowed to flow much more easily. This happens in the bulk of the material, where the electrons are then able to travel through the solar panel material to wire conductors and finally along wires to a load as electricity. This load can be a light bulb, your oven, or your neighbor's water pump, depending on how much you consume and whether you are connected to the grid network, like all electric utility customers. How much electricity is produced is a function of the material the solar panels are made from, the amount of light the panels are exposed to, and the efficiency of all the components in the solar panel system. Also, the temperature of the panels, and several other considerations. Current research for solar materials tends to focus on the efficiency of electrical production in just the solar panels themselves, where recent advances can provide a conversion of almost 50% of the light hitting the panels being transformed into electricity. Unfortunately, the commercial efficiencies don't reach nearly that level, as we will see. Many of these advances are through the choice of chemistry for the panels, but layering thickness and optical coatings can also play a role. Commercial availability limits your potential choices in technology, so you will not need to decide between hundreds of materials just yet. When you approach a solar panel installation company, you will be informed or given the choice to choose between two main technologies. The choice is really a decision between two crystal structures of silicon wafers. Polycrystalline solar panels are identified by the pretty blue colors that they end up showing. These can also be called amorphous silicon, but generally have many crystal orientations all placed together into a single cell. The other main type is a monocrystalline silicon panel. This panel tends to look black, which actually shows why it is more efficient. The black indicates that the panel is absorbing most of the light that is hitting it, which is why you can convert more light into electricity. The polycrystalline panels reflect the blue light to your eye, which is why they look blue. So besides the color, what are the major differences? The polycrystalline panel tends to be less expensive while providing less electricity per amount of light or per square foot of panel you have. The monocrystalline version is more expensive and provides more electricity per amount of light or square footage of panel you have. Depending on your energy requirements and the space you have available to install the panels, you may have to compare the costs and benefits with each of these types of panels. To be complete, there is another type of panel made from thin films, which tend to be much less efficient and less expensive, but may also be physically flexible. These can be used in the case that you need to allow some bend for your installation, like if you plan to install the panels on the roof of an RV or car. I promised a reveal of the commercially available efficiency for solar panels, and that tends to range between 15 and 23%, which makes ads like these interesting. The vendor claims high efficiency, which may be true, but given that they are advertising a polycrystalline panel, which will generally be less efficient than the monocrystalline version, This may be misleading. You should be wary about claims like this since it may be efficient for a certain class of panel, but you may find more efficiency elsewhere. Where you live plays a major role in the amount of electricity you can expect to glean from the sun. Here we see a solar map indicating the amount of potential power from the sun throughout the U.S. Note that the units are in kilowatt-hour per meter squared per day. So the values listed here are the maximum you can expect to recover. If we look at the middle of Oklahoma, we see that the orange coloring indicates a potential of about 5.5 kilowatt-hours per meter squared per day. This assumes no clouds in optimal alignment with the sun throughout the day. Given that an average panel is about 2 square meters, there is a potential to provide 11 kilowatt-hours per day. For context, the average household uses about 1,200 kilowatt-hours per month, which is about 1% of production given by this single panel. So you may be tempted to think that over a 30-day period you would be able to produce 30% of your household use with just a single panel. Remember, however, that we don't get 100% efficiency, so we need to divide by 4 for the most efficient panels that we can get commercially. So now we are using 4 panels to get 30%. But again, remember not all your days are sunny, and maybe you have some obstructions. So there may be even more panels required to get to whatever goal you are trying to reach in your solar production. Okay, let's talk about the types of systems and what makes up the rest of an actual system, since it is not just solar panels. First, there are 2 main types of systems you should be thinking about. The first is called a grid tie system. This is a solar panel system that connects to the electrical grid and uses the grid as a quote-unquote battery. For this type of system, you still have an electrical bill, and you will use the power from the solar system when it is producing, and you will use grid electricity if you have a cloudy day or a broken system. If you are not using all of your power, then the electricity you are producing can also go back into the grid. Since you are connected to a commercial provider and essentially producing power that can be used elsewhere within their system. For this reason, there are certain requirements in the quality of the electricity you are producing, which you need to meet before the utility company will allow you to send power out. This is taken care of in a component called the inverter. But let's take a quick step back and talk about the components in the system. The panels are connected through a direct current system. The direct current, or DC, is like a battery where the voltage is constant. It goes through some safety components like disconnect switches and surge protectors, and then enters the inverter. The inverter changes the DC to AC, or alternating current, which is the electricity you get out of your wall socket. Here the electricity is also conditioned to meet the requirements of utility production. The inverter then connects to your electrical panel breaker box, where it can then connect to the grid. In more recent systems, the panels can have the DC converted to AC right at the solar panel, which are called microinverters. And these can help to keep your solar power system providing maximum output. This type of system does not allow for power when the grid goes down. There is a safety system that prevents electricity from being produced and sent to the grid when the grid is not producing power, like in a power outage, so that linemen working on the electrical lines are not fatally surprised with electricity on a line when there shouldn't be. However, if you want backup power, so you can keep your food cold when the power goes out, then you will need to add a charge controller, which will charge the batteries you will also need to add. Finally, there is a transfer switch, which is a safety switch that essentially cuts your house off from the grid. Now you can produce power in your system and bypass the safety cutoff in the inverter and continue to use power while the power is out from the grid, and you have the ability to charge your batteries. These hybrid systems tend to be fairly expensive because of the added cost of the safety switch and the cost of the batteries themselves. A second solar panel system is an off-grid or standalone system. The components are similar, but you now don't have the same requirements for conditioning on the inverter. For off-grid systems, you are never connected to a grid, so you now need to have batteries and a charge controller. Depending on your appliance selection, you can get away with not having an inverter if you are running all of your equipment off of DC. This would be like choosing RV or boat appliances. However, you will still likely want to have smaller inverters to be able to charge your smartphone or plug in your reading light. Generally, it is uncommon to convert a house from grid tie to off-grid, and most systems tend to be grid tied. If you are building a house in the woods and the utility company is going to charge a large sum to bring out power, then an off-grid system may make more sense. Once you have determined the type of solar system and the size and number of panels, you now need to consider where to place them. Generally, you want to place the panels in a south-facing direction in the northern hemisphere and a north-facing direction in the southern hemisphere so that you are most directly facing your panels towards the sun. There's also a consideration of the actual angle. This is best determined by modeling software with the installation company, since your local environment can affect the efficiency and total light you can collect. In some cases, the angle for the maximum yield for prime production time and months may not provide as much total power as a system that is angled away from the maximum and instead can catch more of the ambient light. This type of angle selection may provide more overall power when you consider the number of cloudy days you may get. Where to place the panels may also be determined by the strength of the underlying structure. You may want to place them on your roof, but will the roof hold the added weight? Here we see an installation that is standalone and replaces a porch covering. Here the question of adequate support is only in the steel structure supporting the panels and have been specifically designed for the panel construction. There's also the added benefit of providing more shade in a porch area. Finally, you will want to look around and survey the obstruction issue. Trees tend to grow, and what you may consider as no issue upon install can become a major obstruction in several years. As a footnote, your install may be determined by the proximity to the breaker box for the grid tie system. If your run is too long, you may incur higher costs for long runs of large copper wires or require a separate visit by an electrician to provide proper connections. Now that we have a basic understanding of the solar generation systems, let's look at a case study for an install spanning 7 years. This case study is a little muddled since the solar panel installation was not the only energy intervention. Some background on the solar system is that the unit is a 6.5 kilowatt system with 20 325 watt panels. It is set at an angle to maximize the overall power production and not just during peak production hours. From just the numbers, we would expect 45 kilowatt hours per day if we assume a 7-hour production window. This would generate a total of 1,350 kilowatt hours per month. Here we see a plot of the energy use in average monthly kilowatt hours for about 14 years. Prior to 2009, we see energy values ranging from 2,000 to 2,800 kilowatt hours per month, denoted by the blue markers in line. During that time, the average monthly electrical utility bill ranged from $175 to $250 per month. This is seen by the green plot and the right side axis. In late 2009, the HVAC system was replaced with a ground source heat pump or geothermal unit. From there, average monthly use range dropped to 1,500 to 2,000 kilowatt hours, or by about 30%. While this intervention is not the focus of the story, it is worth mentioning that the sizing of the solar panel system would have been much larger to accommodate the higher energy use if it had been installed before the geothermal unit. Performing actions that minimize your energy use, like changing the HVAC or adding insulation, is always suggested prior to installing energy production systems. This way, the sizing and the cost of the generation system is minimized, and energy-saving changes tend to be less expensive than power production changes. So let's continue and look at the introduction of the solar panel system, which occurred in late 2015. Here we see a drop in the average monthly energy consumption from the utility drop down to a range of 750 to 1,250 kilowatt hours per month, and the average bill decreases to a range of $75 to $100 per month. This is a decrease of about 40% from the geothermal install and an overall drop of 60% pre-intervention. Given the average values, we see an average total energy production that is closer to 750 kilowatt hours, or roughly slightly more than half of the expected value based on the rated production of the 6.5 kilowatts. This is not unusual, and just shows the losses due to real conditions, like overcast skies, rain, trees, and temperature. If we look at the cost of the energy, we see something a little counterintuitive, which is the price appears to increase over these periods. This actually makes sense, since there is a base cost to be connected to the grid, and when less energy is being used, this base connection fee is a higher percentage of the per kilowatt hour price. So we see an increase in the price for each unit of electricity. So while there tends to be an increase with lowering usage of electricity or more production, The range tends to stay below about 10 cents per kilowatt hour and doesn't drop below about 8 cents per kilowatt hour. These values are shown and monitored since it plays into the eventual ability of the solar system to pay for itself. So thinking about payback periods, the choice of the energy cost is a key factor, so deciding on the value is a little complicated. This is especially true when there are variable pricing schemes implemented by the utility. In general, the more expensive the electricity, the faster the payback time, which is good. However, it also means that you are paying more for electricity. But let's see if we can come up with something useful. First, let's look at the cost to install a solar system. In this study, the value was about $50,000, which is what the initial cost would be. However, there are rebates for installations, and at the time there was an available 30% for this type of system. So the actual cost after rebates is about $33,000. If we look at the average cost of the electricity and the range of cost for the variable times electricity is used, we get a range of prices from about 6 cents per kilowatt hour to about 45 cents per kilowatt hour. If you calculate all the saved kilowatt hours of electricity, comparing it to the average use both before the solar system install and the geothermal install, we get a range of payback periods from 5 years to 40 years. Then, taking an average, since there are so many variables to consider in this rather simple version of estimation, we get a payback period of about 17 years. This compares well with online estimates, which mention 20 to 25 years for solar panel installations. So this is a reasonable investment if the expected lifetime of the panels is greater than the 17 years. For most panels and systems, the expected lifetime is about 25 years. So this is the time before the panel's efficiency drops to about 85% of its initial value. So while you may have added costs to replace some of the components, like the inverter, the panels themselves would still be producing power, albeit with less output than at the initial install, well after the system should have paid for itself. So if you can bear the initial investment, this type of system makes financial sense over the long-term outlook. Add to this that in the last 5 years of the system producing energy, there has also been an equivalent of over 60,000 pounds of CO2 prevented from being emitted into the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels for energy production, or the equivalent of planting over 500 trees. So it has also made a small but measurable environmental impact as well. There are other schemes that utility companies have begun to offer where they will pay to have the solar panels installed and you get the benefit of the lower electricity use and no upfront costs. These programs seem reasonable, but you should look at mediating a future home sale and catches involved if the new owner doesn't want to be held to the contract you originally made. Also, the utility companies give you the electricity, but they take the green, meaning you can't claim the carbon offset or the equivalent tree planting values. This also leads up to a discussion about solar renewable energy credits, or SRECs, which are a form of market-based carbon emission credits. Think cap and trade or something similar, but this is a little beyond the scope of this presentation. We hope you've enjoyed learning a little more about solar panel energy generation systems, and perhaps feel a little more confident about continuing your investigation on your own. Here are some web resources for you to continue your investigation into sustainable ideas, as well as a couple of places you can go to ask questions or get in contact with people who may have answers. Don't let ignorance keep you from becoming a greener you.